And whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Welcome to this third webinar in our Future of Open Data Portal series. Today, we are very happy to welcome Deidre Lee, and she is going to talk about the work that she and her team at Derilinks have been doing for many years, supporting the open government data ecosystem in Ireland. Deidre is the founder of Derilinks, which is an Irish company that was set up in 2014. Has done lots of very interesting work around linked and open data development, including, as I said earlier, work on the Irish Open Government Data Portal. Derilinks and Deidre herself have also been involved in developing the Irish Open Data Technical Framework, including publishing guidelines for open data publishers, which have yielded results beyond the portal itself. The Irish Open Data Initiative has been ranked very high, has been ranked first in Europe in the European Data Portal Maturity Index study 3 years in a row. Today, Deidre is going to talk about how Derilinks is supporting open data publishers as part of this series. So Deidre, thank you so much again for accepting our invitation, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Great, thanks a million for that lovely introduction, Elena. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak today on the webinar series. So the title of my talk is Supporting Open Data Publishers. There are a lot of different stakeholders in the open data ecosystem, and for sure, I think publishers are a very important one. Because if we support open data publishers, this will result in better quality data, and ultimately it will help the users as well. So that's why today I'm going to focus on the open data publishers themselves. But before we kind of go into the future, and the whole idea of this webinar series is the future of open data portals, I think we need to look back a little bit as well. So in 2009, some of you might remember, Tim Berners-Lee gave a TED talk where he called for raw data now. So he was looking at the importance of getting data out there and making people aware of what open data is. And at the time, it was a really important talk, a really important, I guess, step to really bring governments along. Because back then, not many people had heard of the concept of open data or really kind of understood what it was about. So it was very important just to get any data out there, just try and start publishing. And that's where we were in 2009. But really since then, there has been a lot of different advancements have been made. And I guess the whole open data ecosystem is a lot more mature now, which we're delighted to say that a lot of work has been done at a European level, internationally, at lots of different national levels as well. The open data portals, most national governments and a lot of other organizations have portals, they have evolved as well. So really what we're looking at now is not just whatever information that you have, get it out there, raw data now, but really we're looking at, well, what are the high value data sets? How can we really make sure that the information that's published has value and ultimately has impact? So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is really about how can we support public sector bodies not open to publish open data, but in particular to ensure that their initiatives achieve positive impact. And when I talk about impact, and the European Data Portal, you've defined impact very nicely in the maturity survey around environmental impact, economic impact, political and social. So depending on who you are and where you're coming from, what impact means can be different. But really we want to make sure that the data has a positive change. So that's kind of the focus of my talk. And this is where what I'll try to answer or talk through a little bit as well. So Elena has already given an introduction about myself and Derilinks, where we're coming from. Just a brief overview that Derilinks, we lead linked and open data initiatives providing fully hosted and managed data solutions. We were founded in 2014. And we've been delighted that since then we've provided technical support to the National Open Data Initiative here in Ireland, including we've built and we manage the open data portal data.gov.ie that I hope you've all had a good look at. And we're very proud that we have been ranked first in Europe for the past 3 years running, not only for the portal, but for the entire Open Data Initiative. As well as working on the Irish Open Data portal, we work with a lot of other government departments, government agencies, local authorities, and internationally with a lot of sustainable development organizations, such as the World Bank and the International Aid Transparency Initiative. So I guess where DairyLinks is, and from my own personal experience, is very much that we work with open data publishers on a day-to-day level. So we really understand where they're coming from, what they want to see, what they want to achieve, and most importantly, I guess, what their challenges are as well. So I try to kind of think of what are the challenges that our clients, the people we're working with, what do they face most commonly? So we have a couple that are listed here. So one could be organization buy-in. If we are aiming for a culture of open by default, then there really has to be buy-in across the organization by all employees. And there we're talking about, okay, the technical people, the IT departments, the GIS experts, but also from the non-technical side as well. So really kind of the business owners, the different units. And I guess it links back to what Juan was saying in last week's, in the previous webinar about a knowledge scientist as well. So we really need kind of buy-in across organization, and that can be difficult. Similarly, we need to have management support, because if open data is going to be a priority for an organization, then it has to be a priority for management, and it has to be part of the organization's overall strategy, their overall goal. And they have to see it as really an asset of the organization. And then they can invest resources in it. They can support that across the organization. User buy-in is another challenge I was thinking, because for an open data publisher, it's all well and good to publish data, but it really has to be used. And I guess going back to Tim Berners-Lee, publish it and they will come. We're not necessarily seeing that. So it's really that the users have to see value in the data that's published. So for an open data publisher, then they have to understand, well, what is that value and which of my data has the most value to potential users. And similarly, making sure that the data is easy to use. As a user, you want data that's easy to use, you can take, you can lift for whatever purposes. And again, I guess that's subjective, you know. I mean, if you're a application developer or if you're a citizen, how you want to read or understand that information. But for a publisher, it all comes down to the quality of the data. So if you want the data to be easy to use for users, then it has to be of good quality. And a lot of publishers are saying, well, our data in-house isn't of good enough quality for us to use. We don't understand it, where it all is. So we need to get our own house in order before we're ready to publish. And I guess a really important aspect of data quality is the timeliness of the data. So the data is only as useful as it's fresh. If the data isn't kept up to date, if it's not current, then a user will very swiftly move on and try and find other information. So how a publisher keeps their information up to date, it's not an easy task either. And again, making sure that the data is interoperable, because a user wants to be able to not only kind of use one data set and be able to take that and do something with it, but we're seeing more and more bringing data in from different sources, different open data sources, but also combining open data, closed data, enterprise data. And that's where the real magic happens, where the real value is. So that's challenging for an open data publisher to ensure that the data is interoperability, kind of future-proofing it. And then finally, looking at security, of course, it's super important that as a publisher, you're only publishing data as open data that can be made available in the public domain. It's not in breach of any data protection regulation. It's not confidential information. So that's all made available. So these are different kind of challenges that people are looking at. And I guess kind of it's summarized very nicely in this open data excuse bingo card So as open data practitioners, we hear a lot of this a lot of the time from publishers. Oh, I can't publish data. We have to organize our internal data. It's poor quality. It's too complicated. It'll be used it won't be used correctly. It's not very interesting. And while, we can look at it as excuses, but really it's real concerns, I guess, for the open data publishers as well. And us as open data practitioners trying to support publishers, we need to be able to address these concerns, allay the fears, and help the publishers to make that information available. I see if there's hands raised or questions, feel free to jump in, but I'm going to just keep going unless somebody tells me not to. Okay, great. Okay, so there are a lot of models that are out there for open data publication. For example, as part of the work that you guys have done at the European Data Portal, there's the 10 recommendations for data portal owners. There's also GovLabs have done this really nice periodic table of open data impact. The W3C have the data on the web best practices and so on. So there are a lot of models that already exist of, okay, this is how we should be publishing information. So what I'm going to talk about today isn't a new model. There's lots of models out there. I'm also not going to go into detail on the open data portal because we've all very familiar with portals and the functionalities and features and so on as well. And I'm sure you're all regular users of datagov.ie. I'm not going to go into details of the portal itself. But instead, what I'd like to talk about is really in Ireland, how are open data publishers supported by us, by Darelinks, or else just in general by the different components. And I'm going to try and be as practical as possible and give as many examples of really just how it's done in Ireland. And hopefully it'll open up for discussion. I'm not saying it's necessarily this is all right, something's wrong, but just kind of the ideas of where we're coming from. So I'm going to talk about how open data publishers are supported in terms of policy, governance, capacity, technical information, user engagement, and really identifying demand. So if we look at the first one, open data policy. So this, I think, is a really important element of why we've been so successful in Ireland with open data. So the National Open Data Strategy was launched in 2017, and it covers a period of 5 years, 2017 to 2022. And it sets out the overall objectives of the Open Data Initiative, but also a roadmap of how to get there, a really clear action plan, timeline, who's responsible, to work towards the goals of where we want to be with open data. So I guess that's kind of kept us honest, kept us on track, and we try to keep on with that as much as possible. But as well with the open data strategy, it's not a standalone document, but it's really part of a wider legislative package. So here's just some examples of other policies, legislation, strategies that are very much related to open data. Of course, there's the EU Directive on Open Data and BSI, the revised in 2019, which will be transposed by July 2021. So that's a really strong driving force at the national level for publishers getting on board, going back to the organisation buy-in and management support for open data. We have the strategy. There's also the public service data strategy, which is an Irish government document to look at data management and data sharing across the Irish public sector. So open data features as a key part of that, but it's also much more of a wider remit as well in terms of internal data sharing, definition of base registries, and security and so on. The public service ICT strategy, government strategy, and so on. So we really see how open data is very much embedded across lots of data, digital reform policy. And that's exactly where we want open data to be, that it's not out on its own. The second element I want to talk about is the governance of open data. And again, this is something that has been very much at the forefront of the Open Data Initiative nationally since 2015, and then broken down as well. So the Open Data Initiative here in Ireland is driven by the Open Data Unit, which sits in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So Rhoda Cairns and the team there do great work at really being responsible and driving the Open Data Initiative. Rhoda actually spoke at CEMIC 2020 there a week or two ago. If you want to find out more information from her as well. So the Open Data Unit reports directly into the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. But there's also the Open Data Governance Board, and that also reports into the Minister. And the aim of the Open Data Governance Board is really to lead and drive, I guess, to ensure the implementation of the Open Data Strategy. So they have ownership on the strategy itself and ensuring its implementation. And it was important that this governance board was representative of all different sectors. So there are some larger public sector bodies that are big data holders, but there's also representatives from business, from academia, from media, from civil society. So we're looking there at a very, I guess, a group that can come in at all different angles and all different perspectives. There's the Open Data Advisory Group. Now this is a cross-departmental group with representatives from, again, some of the bigger public body publishers. So this is a public bodies group, and they really advise on the technical side of the Open Data Initiative, kind of how open data should be published. And they also champion open data across the public sector, that they promote it within their organizations, but also at conferences, at forums, and different groups that they're participating in. So they're a very important group as well. And then a newer group that has been added as part of the Open Data Strategy is the Open Data Liaison Network. And these are representatives from every single public body has an Open Data Liaison Officer. And that's someone who's responsible for open data and driving open data within their organization. And they're also a contact point. So if a request comes in for some kind of open data, then it'll be directed first to the Open Data Liaison Officer. And then they can say, they mightn't be the data holder, but they'll be the point of contact that can then go and maybe understand if the information is available, if it can be made available as open data or so on. So that network is also a peer group that's learning from each other. So it's a really important group in terms of the overall governance. So you see kind of it's well covered, I guess, that we've got a top-down approach from the minister, from the department, but also there's ownership at each of the organization levels. Okay, so the next part that I'd like to talk about is building capacity. And like, this is really kind of, again, when we're talking about supporting open data publishers, that something that we hear a lot is that really just the skill set isn't there, that they don't have the capacity, the resources, the tools to be able to publish open data. So again, this is something that here in Ireland is taken very seriously, and especially driven by the team at the Open Data Unit. So there is open data training that is provided to all public sector bodies. There's a number of different courses that they can take, from introduction to open data, to data analytics, to data anonymization, linked open data, and so on. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, this training has actually gone online, so that the training is still kept there, because open data isn't stopping. So we want to ensure that the capacity is still there. So the training is a really important piece. We also have some specific workshops with maybe user groups that have specific needs, for example, statistical users or geospatial or whatever. So we have some kind of dedicated face-to-face workshops. Obviously, this was in pre-COVID times as well. We have a lot of online resources, guides for publishers, and how-tos. We try and make, from the portal perspective, things as easy as possible, very user intuitive, that publishers can take responsibility for their own publication as well. And as I was mentioning before, this Open Data Liaison Officer Network is also very important for this kind of peer-to-peer learning from a technical perspective, but also from a organizational side and the culture side as well, to really kind of see, well, you know, this is what I'm hearing from, I tried to push for open data, but this is what my colleagues are saying. How did you handle that? Did you have similar problems, and so on? So really this kind of training and support and capacity building is very important to ensure that everyone is able to publish open data. Okay, so I guess this is the technical aspect is something that is, I guess, most close to my heart and what we do in Datalinks. is really helping the open data publishers from a technical perspective. So a lot of the challenges that we face, that and making sure that the data is easy to use, it's interoperable, it's up to date, and so on. So how can we do this in really practical terms as well? Because not everyone is coming from a technical perspective. So how can we provide guidance and support at all levels? So Elena mentioned in her introduction that we have the Open Data Technical Framework. And this was a document that we wrote in 2015. So together with the Open Data Unit, with ourselves, and with the Open Data Advisory Group. And I guess harking back to Tim Berners-Lee and the raw data now, we wanted it to be as simple as possible. This was coming to organizations and public sector bodies who maybe hadn't heard of open data, never mind were familiar with it. So we just wanted some clear, simple messages. Publish your data with an open data license, using open machine readable formats, use a standard metadata schema, DCAT application profile, use recommended standards where possible to facilitate interoperability, and use unique resource identifiers within the data. So that was it. Basically, we're looking at basic 3-star data, some good quality CSVs. And really, it was very powerful in that, because it was a simple message that helped people get on the first step of the ladder, start publishing, and so on. Where we're at now, what are we, 5 years later, a lot has changed in the open data ecosystem, but also from a technology perspective. If we look at machine learning, AI, Internet of Things, how data is collected and gathered, how important data is, how data is used. So a lot has changed. So we really wanted to, I guess, update and refresh the open data technical framework as well to reflect these changes. So this year we've been working on the Open Data Technical Publication Guidelines, which is basically a revision of the technical framework, together with the Open Data Advisory Group, looking at really best practices and guidelines that will ensure the discoverability and accessibility of data, empower people to understand and use data, support increased public service transparency, drive evidence-based decision-making and innovation, and very importantly, enable measurable impact, because that's something that we all struggle with as well. So that's what we're looking at. It's about 20 different guidelines. My starting point for this talk was I'll present the guidelines, but then it was like, no, that won't be very interesting. So instead, I'm going to talk about 3 specific examples of open data publishing that really are embodying these new guidelines and are really kind of good examples of how to publish open data according to what we're looking at now. So of course I have to have a COVID-19 slide, but this is a great example of how open data can really be so valuable and very important. Ireland was, I think, probably one of the earlier publishers of open data. So back in March, the Health Protection Surveillance Centre, the HPSC, is responsible for gathering COVID information. And together with Ordnance Survey Ireland and the Central Statistics Office, they made that information available as open data. So that's information on not only cases, but hospitalizations, the number of people in ICUs, broken down by different age groups and so on, and published on a daily basis. So that was very important. So all of that information is made available via datagov.ie. So the raw data is there and it's kept up to date. But really importantly as well, going back to our non-technical users, that making sure that this information was as accessible as possible. So there's a dashboard that Ordnance Survey and other organisations manage, the Ireland's COVID-19 Data Hub, and there you see the top line, the headline metrics of number of cases. You see some nice graphs that compare different elements over time by geographical region and so on as well. So it's really easy to understand. And also, so in Ireland, we have a lot of different organisations, both at public bodies, but also academic institutes that have a lot of experience with semantic web and data technologies. So the ADAPT Research Centre based in Trinity have already started publishing or transformed this information, made it as available as linked data as well. So that's kind of really powerful that we have the information available in raw format and it's available as 5-star linked open data. So going back to our guidelines, some of the guidelines that this example of publishing COVID-19 data touches upon is ensuring that the data is up to date. Publishing high value data sets. I mean, you can't get a higher value right now. Enabling the geolocation of data. So the data is broken down mainly by county, but there's also the 14-day incident rate that is broken down by local electoral area, LEA. So that's more granular as well, which is great. Providing the data as 5-star linked open data and supporting non-technical users in understanding the data through the dashboard. So that's just an example of the kind of guidelines that we're looking at. So my second example is the real-time passenger information API, RTBI. And this has always been one of the most popular data sets on DataGov.ie. It was originally published in, I think, 2012, and it has hundreds of millions of requests per day. So the RTBI is published by the National Transport Authority, NTA, here in Ireland. And they realized, okay, there's such a super high demand for this, and maybe it's a little dated as well. So what users need isn't exactly what the API is currently providing. And also the infrastructure that they have in-house isn't suitable for addressing all of the requests that are coming in. So this year they've updated the real-time passenger information. So now the GTFS, the General Transit Fee Specification API, is made available. So I think this is a super example of, maybe if I want to, so sorry, first of all, what the API is. It provides information about public transport schedules, different updates, the different routes that they go on, if there's any delay, the expected time, and so on. And GTFS is, of course, an international standardized way of representing this scheduling information for public sector transport. So some of the guidelines that I guess this is a good example of is, first of all, it's publishing data via an API. And again, we saw it even in the original version of the RTBI API was super popular because it was an API. And because of that, it was so heavily used by different application developers, and the information is being pulled in for so many different uses. And again, of course, the new version is an API as well. It uses data standards. So it was very important that the new version of the API was GTFS compliant, so that it was easy to use here in Ireland, but also interoperability at a cross-border level as well. Co-locating documentation for the data set, that there's a lot of help and support for users of the API. Collaboration with the user community. So the NTA, they have a good understanding of a lot of who their users are. So they were able to, I guess, have a discussion with them and say, well, what are the challenges with the current API? How can it be improved? What other information might you want? What other formats could it be in? And so that engagement with the user community around publishing the information was very important in improving the new version of the API. And then in measuring data use. So because it's an API and it does require registration, so they're looking at a fair usage policy. So being able to measure how the actual API is being used as well. So again, that's going back to measurable data. Just the final example I'm going to give of good practice from the guidelines perspective is the Central Statistics Office. So the Central Statistics Office, the CSO here in Ireland, has been a super publisher of open data from the very beginning. It's part of their remit to make information available and accessible. And I know that's common with a lot of national statistics organizations across Europe. Excuse me. I'm not used to speaking so much these days. So from the CSO have a very rich data set, obviously lots of different statistical information. So they're developing a new interface to allow people to browse that more easily. It's multidimensional information being statistical, so you can filter down by the different dimensions. And again, it's easy for a non-technical user to start looking at the raw data as well, but just looking at it from different perspectives. So it's supporting the data usage there. The CSO has also always been very involved in linked data projects and promoting the publication of linked statistical data. So this dashboard at the top right is a project that we did with the CSO under the European Statistical System Network, SNET framework, where we worked with the National Statistics Office from Ireland, France, Italy and Bulgaria, to look at particular data sets and how that could be made more interoperability through using linked data technologies. And again, just on the bottom right here, not only do they kind of support data processors, data users, but also general citizens, because it's very important that the information that's collected from the CSO is across all domains, and it's really important to get that message out to the general public. So they provide really good visualizations, apps, and infographics, such as this one, COVID-19 as well. It's really easy to understand and easy to look at. So the guidelines, I guess, that we're seeing in practice here is the publication of historical data sets. So they go back in lots of different areas. For example, the censuses from 2011, 2016, and so on. So you can compare across time. Publishing data in open data formats. They use the statistical format PX and also JSON-Stat to publish the data. They use a lot of different data standards. They support non-technical users in understanding the data, providing a lot of examples of data in use through their visualizations and infographics, and still providing the data as 5-star linked data. So these are the kind of guidelines that we're looking at kind of going forward for, I guess, the future of open data here in Ireland. Okay, so just two more points, very important points. So one is around user engagement. And when we look at all of the models of, how what we should be doing with open data and open data impact, user engagement is, of course, always very high up there. Through our portal, there's a lot of ways that users can engage with open data publishers, the open data unit, with ourselves, and so on, through requests for data, liking data sets, commenting on data sets. There's a survey and so on. But one thing that we found really just that has had huge kind of value, I guess, around user engagement is our open data impact series. So we've had 5 different events to date. The first 4 were face-to-face, which were brilliant. And then our last one, our open data in COVID-19, was a virtual event. And the whole idea of the Open Data Impact Series was about bringing data users and data publishers together, because it's all well and good talking to data publishers over here and saying, okay, these are the technical guidelines, this is how you should be publishing open data, and then separately having data users. But we really needed to start a conversation between them so that the needs of data users were understood and being met, and that the challenges that data publishers were having were also being understood by the data users. You might be sending me for a COVID test soon. But so we looked at lots of different areas with the different impact series. So the first one was on business, then transport, environment, arts, and then the COVID-19 one as well. So really looking at bringing together users and practitioners, but from a very specific, or not very specific, but from a general area, so that at least kind of we could get into detail. Because sometimes I think at open data events that we still are talking very high level about, this is data and this is good and here's formats and so on. But really practitioners, I mean, if you're passionate about the environment, then you want to be talking about air quality information, illegal dumping, all of the different elements that are specific to that domain. So it was important for us to really look at the domain specific as well. So we really find that very useful for bringing people together. And it's been short events, panel discussions, a couple of demos of how open data is actually being used and so on. And then finally, I guess, kind of looking at identifying demand for open data, because really, I mean, if we're looking at publishing information that has value, that will create a positive impact, but we want to make sure that there's an actual demand for the information that we're having as well. And again, so for demand, I'm just going to give 3 examples of different projects where we're seeing demand kind of bubbling up, and that match between demand for data and provision of data kind of matching or aligning better than previously, I suppose. So our first one is around from the Smart Dublin team. So Smart Dublin is an initiative of 4 Dublin local authorities And they come together really to see how digital solutions could improve the lives of people working, living, and traveling in data. So there's a lot of very specific projects that are being worked on there. And from specific projects, you get specific needs, and specific needs then drive the request for specific data as well. So one is the Flooding Innovation Project, where they're looking at, I guess, flood risk across the Dublin area. And there's a number of different sensors. So we've got some river level sensors, some rainfall sensors, and so on. But really kind of bringing that information together in a way that's easy to use. And the demand is there, not only kind of from general citizens, but really from the businesses, from the commercial partners that Smart Dublin have, and also the academic partners, because they're participating in a lot of research projects. So they're going, okay, well, we need, in order to be able to do our work or to do our risk assessment for flooding, we need high quality data. So then we can come and we can support Smart Dublin in looking at the different data sources and providing the information as APIs in a standardized way. So that's a really good example. And of course, there's lots of other projects that the Smart Dublin team are looking at similarly. Secondly is a project that's actually just kicked off. So this is the Hale and Hearty project. I know Hale and Hearty might be an Irish phrase, but it's really about improving the health and well-being of people living in Ireland. It's a European funded project under the CEF programme, and it's a partnership between ourselves, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, the Department of Health, the Central Statistics Office, Fingal County Council, and the other Smart Dublin local authorities, and the IDCC, Irish Data and Cloud Cluster. So we're looking at trying to make specifically health and well-being more easily accessible, so that can be used as part of a specific knowledge base and used for specific health and well-being applications. So as part of the project, an application will be developed, but we're looking kind of at a wider remit at that. And so it'll be information such as from sports and recreation amenities. And so Sports Ireland actually has a project running in parallel, building out a database of, or basically a national repository of sports and recreation amenities, which will be a good data source for this project. But also looking at local authority information. So it could be, again, looking at maybe air quality, water quality, more up-to-date information, and then more general information from the health providers around health services. So it could be acute services from hospital or from primary care centres or so on, and bringing that information together for specific purposes. And as part of the project, we've defined different user profiles, and we're carrying out workshops and engagement around those user profiles to really understand what their needs are and what the demand is there as well. And I guess just a final example from an international project. So we do a lot of work with the World Bank and their energy data portal, which provides a lot of information around energy, electrification, grid management, renewable sources, and so on. But very importantly is the application of this information. So they've, again, it always seems to come from, for us, a lot of different existing projects that are there, the real needs of the workers in the fields. So one example here is the Global Electrification Platform. So they wanted an application to be able to understand the different investment strategies and different electrification scenarios, taking into account the context of particular countries. So that could be the population density, the current grid setup, and so on. So how that could be mapped. And this really uses kind of open data that's provided from the energy data portal, so very importantly. They're just kind of examples of kind of how demand is, I guess, kind of recognized and identified and tried to be brought in as part of the open data publication process as well. So just to wrap up, excuse me, if we go back to our original question, how can we support public sector bodies not only to publish open data, but to ensure that their initiatives achieve positive impact? So here, I guess, is just it's my final slide. It's a summary of what I've been talking about. It's absolutely not a scientific study, so I'd love to hear your feedback on it. But in the different areas, how support structures like policy, open data governance, building capacity, providing technical guidelines, user engagement, and identifying demand, can then go back and match some of the challenges that the publishers were facing. So for example, looking at user engagement really should be able to help us address user buy-in, that the information is easy to use and interoperable. So yeah, that's it from me. I'd love to hear your comments, your experiences, your feedback during this session, but also if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me after the session as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I think there's been few talks in the last few weeks where I could cheer up and agree with almost every single slide you were presenting. I think it resonates a lot with some of the experience we have made as researchers of the open data ecosystem and as contributors to the European Data Portal. If anyone has any question, either put your hand up and I will see it in the participant lists and ask you to ask your question live, or if you prefer to just type it in the chat and I will read it out loud. And while you guys think about questions, I have written a few notes while I was listening to the talk, and I'd like to go back to the users and user engagement and sort of ask you about your experience with the users. So you mentioned these different types of events that you guys organize. So one of the things I find difficult is to really understand what is the typical user that arrives to a open government data portal and interacts with the data set, and I was wondering what would be your views on this mythical creature and the engagements you had and your work with the publishers as well.
All I can think of now is the Gruffalo and purple prickles all over their back, but maybe not. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of there's like obviously a variety, really, you know. So if we go back to the example of the COVID-19 data sets that are being published, I think that's been very interesting because it's been a little bit more visible about the users of the information as well. So from general analytics of the portal, of the website, you know, the usage has absolutely gone up over the past couple of months. So more people are coming to the portal, and that's more than likely due to the data sets being available. So more people are looking for the data sets. So I would imagine there people might first of all go to the dashboard because that's maybe promoted widely on government websites. And then if people are looking for the data behind that, then they go to the datagov.ie. And we can see also on social media that, you know, pretty much every day or every couple of days, there's a reference to that data and pointing to the source data on datagov.ie as well. So that's anyone who's looking at the information, wants a little bit more background, wants to point to evidence, which is really interesting. They're saying, okay, I think this, and here's a graph that I did, and there's the data that I've used, which has been really useful as well. So in that sense, I guess it's everyone. I mean, there's a lot of citizen science probably going on at the minute, but of course, then there's a lot of other people kind of using that information from academics, from policymakers, from businesses, and so on as well. At a wider level, I mean, if we look at the impact series, what's really nice about that is a lot of open data publishers will know their domain and they'll know a lot of the, I guess, the user groups or user types. So for example, again, with the NTA and the RTBI, the real-time transport information, they know who a lot of the main applications are that are using it. And similarly, actually with the Sport Ireland sport and recreation database, they're currently engaging with a lot of potential users around it as well. So the publishers themselves, I guess, have a good idea and can, I guess it's about starting that conversation and being ready to hear what the users might say.
Yeah. So it's interesting what you're saying about the COVID-19 data sets and about the increased activity on the portal, as we have seen. So with Louise, who's also in the webinar today, we've just released a month or so ago a report where we've analyzed search logs from the last 3 years of the EDP, and one of the corpora was really related specifically to data sets about COVID-19, which were featured on the portal as well, and we've made very similar observations. So I guess it goes to say that perhaps also the ability to illustrate stories and showcases of a particular data set or a collection of data set in a particular domain could fuel people's imagination. There's a question from Louise, which I'm going to ask, and then I will go on with what I wanted to say. So Louise is asking, do you think data interlinking should be the responsibility of the portal, the responsibility of the publisher, somehow supported by the tool sets, or by training within the portal? So who do you think is responsible for that? And how is this handled for the Irish Open Government Data Portal?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important that there is interlinking going on so that the data can be brought together and integrated. I think it's, looking back at our technical guidelines, one of them is to use trusted identifiers. So I think a lot of the onus has to be on the original data publisher, on really reusing base registries, using data standards, using data models. These are all kind of good data management overall practices, and also for open data publication. So, and this is a big part of the public data strategy here in Ireland, not only for open data, but in general, these good kind of data practices to facilitate the interoperability of information. So I guess then the definition of these, for example, base registries and so on, then we're going back to the governance piece, and that might be, for example, the Office of the Government CIO, it might be the Open Data Unit, it might be the Open Data Advisory Group, or so on, kind of to define what are these identifiers and models and standards that should be used. Or it could be domain specific, like there's the local authorities here are working together on specific standards and models for data pertaining to local authorities and so on. So you might have some domain specific standards as well. But you mentioned also the capacity piece, and I think that's very important, that once these are put in place, that there is the suitable kind of training on, well, how can they be used? How can they be incorporated into legacy systems, incorporated into, okay, this is how we do it. This is how data is collected and generated. Suddenly, as we start to publish open data, okay, we have to use these models. So really that these are good data practices that are embedded in the organization. Then, you know, at the portal level, there's always, I guess, kind of help and tricks and improved discoverability that can be done at that level as well for more unstructured data. But I think kind of getting, and I'm not talking about all 5-star linked open data, I'm just talking about, you know, the use of some basic data standards and data models at core as well is important.
Thank you. A question from Brenda, in relation to culture and heritage, who is engaging with these data sets and for what, and what are the standards used?
Okay, so there's a whole blog post around we had an Open Data Impact Series event on arts, culture and heritage, and it's super important here in Ireland. And I think, yeah, anyway, so there's I guess kind of who's engaging, you mean kind of at a general level as opposed to here specifically in Ireland. So, like, I mean, culture and heritage, I'm trying to think of the different areas that were represented in that event. So there was very much a strong representation from tourism. So from both, I guess, national staycationing, but international tourism as well. Of course, kind of here in Ireland, it's very important to highlight what those areas are, from an academic side, from education, from schools, and also cultural piece as well. I guess kind of maybe from media, but I think they're the ones that stand out at the moment.
Thank you for that.
But just sorry to point to, there's a link on the slides that'll be made available to, I think the blog has a lot of more information about who actually spoke at that particular event and so on.
Yes, thank you for that. And we'll publish the slides alongside the recording as well. Okay, I'm losing my voice as well. Good thing that we have 8 minutes left. A question from Raymond: where do you see the biggest challenges in publishing open data in your experience in Ireland? So considering all the technical guidance and all the work that you and the other stakeholders have put in building this ecosystem.
So if I'm looking here at the 7 different challenges that I've put here, I'm going to have to say organization buy-in. I think we definitely have come such a long way from raw data now and people not knowing, never hearing what open data is, that there is a lot more awareness of it, but is there a prevalence? I'm not sure. So I think kind of that culture change is one of the biggest challenges that face. There's a lot of positives going forward in that. I'd actually maybe add another tick here now. I think having the policy in place supports organization buy-in as well, because there's that maybe wider understanding, that wider strategy, that wider safety net of, okay, this is government policy, this is what we should be doing, and understanding what the benefits are. Not only that I'm publishing the data for the benefit of some end user out there, but I'm publishing the data and there's a benefit for me personally, there's a benefit for my organization, there's a benefit for the public sector as well as outside of the public sector as well. So there's still a bit of work to be done there.
Thank you. A question from Thierry: are there procedures to ensure that data is up to date? What about past data, in quotes, that might be still relevant for certain reasons?
So making sure that information is up to date, automate. That's all I can say there. Yeah, I mean it's so important, and we see it so often on open data portals that the data can very easily become stale. And from my experience, that can be a lot of the time if there is, I guess, too much kind of manual components of the publication process. As soon as you automate that, then it helps keep the information up to date, and it relieves the burden of the open data publication as well, because you don't want it to be hassle. You don't want, you want to be able to help the publication process. So what we do in Ireland is datagov.ie harvests information from a lot of different sources, from other open data portals, from other internal systems, from websites, from lots of different places, and they're harvested usually on a nightly basis. And then the source publisher keeps that up to date as well. So really, if you can kind of tie it in with your own systems and automate it, then it's just easier to keep it up to date then. And then with historical data sets, yes, it's absolutely valuable from a analysis perspective to have historical data sets. So there you might be looking at large data sets and different access, and from our side as well, for example, with for example, the Dublin bikes, so the bike sharing scheme around Dublin, you can find real-time information via the suppliers API, but we also wanted to gather historical information together with Smart Dublin so that people could carry out analysis about kind of the different movements, or well, the different kind of availability on different stands over periods of time, over time, and time of the day and things like that as well. But we had to then design the API to facilitate the larger amounts of data that were there. So there's a bit of, I guess, work in making that available in the best ways, but it's absolutely important. Sorry, absolutely possible and very important.
Thank you. And a final question for me. Say we've come such a long way as you've explained as well, in various parts of the world in this journey. What data do you think is badly missing still? Where do we still have like the biggest gaps?
well covered.
I can't hear. Sorry, Dave, I couldn't hear you for the first few seconds of that.
Sorry, it was more me thinking to myself out loud. If we look at the different kind of areas that, like the different categories of data that are more well covered, perhaps, of course, there's always work to be done in each area, but transport, environment, and energy, financial information, healthcare information, maybe education information is something that we're looking at here more as well. I guess the ones that can be a little trickier as well. So I mean, okay, transport, maybe environmental, it's more statistical, it's not kind of personal, it's more about public services. It's natural that was more the low-hanging fruit. Whereas now if we're looking at more domains that have a human element, so there's more, obviously data security comes into play, data protection, anonymization, and so on. So it's all very, very doable, but being able to publish there. So yeah, maybe kind of in the healthcare domain, in the education space and things like that. But again, there's a lot, I guess, being done there, but it's to build on that.
Thank you. And thank you again for your talk. And to those of you who want to join us in 2 weeks, we're going to be welcoming Natasha Noy from Google AI, who is going to talk about Google Dataset Search, which is a tool that was launched by Google a few years ago, searching for all sorts of datasets, not just open government data ones on the web. Thank you again for joining us on this possibly historical day. Deidre, take care of yourself and your voice. And thanks again. A round of applause. And I wish you all a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Good work at the EDP as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
See you
you.
guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.